Okay, and welcome back, students who are taking Math for Business and Finance and Math Applications. And this is for Chapter 5, the theory for solving equations for the unknown. And this is part 4, and most likely it is the last video for this theory. Okay, so now let me scroll down here and get to where we were at. Okay, like unknowns rule. To solve equations with like unknowns, you first combine the unknowns and then solve with the opposite processes used in the equation. All right, let me just, okay, so let's say I have something like, I don't know, 5x is equal to, oops, sorry, I don't want an equal, 5x plus x is equal to, say, 30. Okay. To solve equations with like unknowns, remember the book uses unknowns. That's another word for variables. I have a tendency to use the word variables. I don't like using the word unknowns, but be it as it may, I have the same variable, which is x. All right, and I'm solving this equation with like because they are x. One is an x and the other one is an y. Okay, they're both x. You combine the unknowns and then solve with the opposite process using the equation. So yes, I have to combine these variables. Remember, the plus x means that's a plus 1x, right? So if I have 5x and I have 1x, 5 plus 1 is 6. I combine them and making it 6x, and that is equal to 30. Now, the 6x means, oops, the 6x means that is 6 times the variable x. So if I'm multiplying, I use the opposite process in order to solve for the variable. So I'm multiplying, I'm going to divide both sides. What you do on one, since I'm multiplying, I use the opposite process, which is division. And what I do on one side of the equation, I have to do on the other side of the equation, which is division, by the same number. Okay. See how all of these rules are all flowing together. Okay. You have to know the rules. You don't have to memorize them, but you have to understand the concepts and be able to apply them in the correct sequence. All right. What is called for at that particular time. When it comes to solving for word problems, which is our next slide, we'll talk about that a little bit more. The setup of word problems seems to be the hardest thing, but being able to do the math behind once the equation is set up should be simple. All right, because that's all it is addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and following the rules, knowing when to use them at whatever particular point in time. So I have 6x over 6 is equal to 30 over 6. Any number over itself is 1, so they cancel out. Again, that's from a previous chapter, so I'm left with x on the left-hand side of the equal sign, and 30 divided by 6 is equal to 5, so x is equal to 5. All right. Now, if I want to check myself, I just plug the 5 into wherever I see an x. So if I have 5, I have an x, I put in the 5, and then I have another x, I put in the 5, and that's equal to 30. So 5 times the quantity 5 is 5 times 5 is 25, plus the 5, because remember this is understood that that's a 1. 1 times 5 is 5, and that equals 30. So 25 plus 5 is 30, equals to 30. So I know that this here 5 being my x is correct as an answer. Okay. Now these are all of the rules, right? That we've covered all of the rules. Again, get comfortable using them. All right. The only way you're going to get comfortable using them is doing enough problems. And you'll find that when you're doing a word problem, as I had said earlier in one of the other videos, you can use the book to guide you, but don't copy it exactly. Right? Get used to treating each and every problem as an individual problem and solving for that individual problem. even though you might have done that problem the same way 10 times before. Okay, you'll start to see the patterns that occur, and you'll begin to know what to do and when to do it. But if you're going to sit there and treat all problems exactly alike and mimic it from the textbook, look in the textbook, see the example, and try to copy it exactly from the textbook, what you're going to find is you're going to find that you're not going to be getting correct answers because each problem is slightly different than another one. All right. It's not to say that, if you're taking a test that half of the problems will be almost identical to what you see as examples in the textbook or the homework problems, but the other half won't be. And, if you only get half of them right, you failed. Okay. So treat each problem individually and always think of it in that perspective. Always treat it as a fresh set of skills that you're bringing to this particular situation, not a copy and mimic kind of thing. Use your brain, use your thought process. Right? You're not using your thought process when you're copying or mimicking, and therefore you're going to be missing things and, of course, score low. Right? Now, for this last slide and the last concept and theory for this chapter, solving word problems for unknowns. It's basically a 5-step process. Okay. One, let me get my cursor here. Step one, you carefully read the entire problem. You may have to read it several times. And you do this in order to be able to wrap your mind around what's going on in the problem. You're going to be given a lot of data. Some of it's going to be useful, some of it isn't going to be useful. Some of it you're going to have to modify. Okay? And you also have to understand what the question is asking. You're not going to be able to, you can if it's relatively simple and you've done a lot of this, but it's better for you to read a problem several times so that your mind can get adjusted to what's being presented to it and what you have to be solving for, which is in step number 2. You ask yourself, what is the problem looking for? I see a lot of students, start doing a problem and they go off on a tangent because they don't know what they're supposed to be solving for. They solve for something else. And of course, they get the question wrong. And, in a test situation, yeah, you're trying to get the test right. But if realize that the test is, these questions are based in reality. If you're out there in the real world, you're going to, I see this all the time. People say doing woodworking. Okay. You have length, width, and height on a piece of a board. And if you don't know what you're solving for, you're going to cut the board incorrectly. Okay. And then you just wasted, money, and if you're working for somebody that makes furniture and you're cutting boards incorrectly, you just wasted money for them and they're not going to keep you around. All because you didn't know what you were looking for. Okay. Doing test questions is not just about doing test questions. Studying and learning the material is not just about getting a degree. It's developing the skill sets to take outside of the degree and use in the real world. Okay. Step number 3. When you are sure what the problem is asking, let a variable represent the unknown. Okay. And here they're trying to equate the variable with the unknown, basically saying that they're the same thing. I like using the term variable instead of unknown. If the problem has more than one unknown, represent the second unknown in terms of the same variable. Okay. For example, if the problem has 2 unknowns, y is one unknown. The second unknown is 4y, where 4 times minus 4 times the second unknown is 4y. It's 4 times the first unknown. Right? To give a little bit better example, this is what was typed in the book. But to give a little bit better example, let's say, and I'm not going to use the letter Y, I'm going to use the letter X. Let's say Pete has X of something. And this is Pete. Okay, and let's say Joe, he has 4 times as much as Pete. Well, Joe is a separate person from Pete. Okay, And we don't want to treat Joe, we don't want to represent Joe as Y, okay, as a different variable, because it's the relationship between Pete and Joe. Joe has 4 times as much as Pete. So we keep the same variable X, all right, and represent it as a second unknown, right? And if we add those together, and let's say that equals to say 20, okay, notice that we, in the previous video, like unknowns rule, okay, or no, in this video, it's the like unknowns rule, all right? So what I've done is I have one unknown, Pete, and I'm assigning it the variable X, and I have Joe, which is the second unknown, and that's why the textbook uses the word unknown. But we represent it by using the same variable X, okay? So we have the 2 unknowns, then we can add them together and solve for X itself. Which brings us to step 4, visualize the relationship between the unknowns and variables, then set up an equation to solve for the unknowns, which is just exactly what I just did, okay? I said Pete is X, Pete has X of something, and Joe has 4 times as many, right? There's a relationship between the 2 of them. And I'm saying, well, between the 2 of them, they have 20 altogether, okay? And we set up that equation, and then we can solve for the variable. And in this case here, that's 5x, so the x would end up being 4. And then we can plug the 4 back in to know exactly how many Joe has, and we can plug the 4 back in order to know how many Pete has. Okay. Then step 5, check your results to see if it is accurate. Well, if I have x plus 4x is equal to 20, and we know x is 4, so that's 4, plus 4 times 4 is 20, so 4 plus 16 is equal to 20, so 20 is equal to 20, right? But we know that Pete has 4 because x is equal to 4, and we know that Joe is 4 times 4, or 16, so we know Joe has 16, right? Check your results to see if they're accurate. Right? Now this was a relatively simple example, and I know I didn't give you a problem. You're going to get plenty of problems as you move forward, okay? But the whole idea being here is that these are a pretty good set of steps to follow in solving word problems, okay? Let me erase all of this here. And what you want to do in following these, go through the steps every time you have a word problem. And only by doing more problems will you become more accustomed to them. And then as the problems get more and more complicated, you're going to keep on finding yourself falling back on these same set of steps. And then when you have the equation set up, which is step number 4, and you begin to solve it, then what you're going to do is you're going to go back to all of these previous rules and use those rules in order to be able to solve for that particular equation, okay? And you'll end up with an answer. You check your answer by plugging that answer into your variable, and everything should equal out. Right, so this has been the theory. This is the last video for this chapter, and I will see you in doing the word problems. There's actually 3 sets of word problems and drill problems, 3 sets to those, I believe, and then the summary practice test. But from here on out, you're talking about an awful lot of word problems. So get accustomed to them and rewatch these videos if you need to. If you still have any questions, you don't understand something, telephone or email an instructor. Okay? See you in the word problem videos.